Most people think theft involves a mask and a crowbar, but in Briar Glen, it wears a bespoke suit and calls you sweetheart. I sat across from my father and listened to him explain why my $10 million trust fund was empty. He looked so calm, so painfully reasonable. He thought he had buried me under legal jargon and family loyalty, forgetting that the deadliest weapon in a contract isn't the fine print. It is the signature. The flight into Logan Airport felt like traveling backward in time. I watched the gray Atlantic coastline tilt and straighten through the oval window, my stomach tightening with a familiar, acidic dread. I was 33 years old, a graphic designer with a life in Chicago, an apartment I paid for, and a cat named Miller. But as the plane touched down in Massachusetts, all of that dissolved. I was just Nora Turner again, the daughter who left, the one who did not quite fit the mold of Briar Glen. I rented a sedan because I did not want my father sending a car for me. The drive to Briar Glen took 40 minutes, winding through corridors of maple and oak that were just beginning to turn the color of dried blood. The town was exactly as I had left it 5 years ago. Pristine, manicured, and aggressively silent. The hedges were trimmed to geometric perfection, and the colonial houses sat far back from the road, guarding their secrets behind iron gates and long driveways. My father's house. Our house. I corrected myself, though it never felt like it anymore, loomed at the end of a crushed white gravel drive. It was a sprawling Georgian estate with black shutters and ivy that looked like it had been glued in place by a set designer. I parked the rental next to my father's Range Rover and a sleek silver convertible I recognized as belonging to my half-brother, Camden. I took a breath, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. Grief does that to you. It hollows out your eyes and pulls at the corners of your mouth. My mother had died 3 weeks ago from a sudden aneurysm. The funeral had been a blur of lilies and polite condolences from people who had not spoken to her in years. Orchestrated entirely by my stepmother, Elaine. I had returned to Chicago immediately after, unable to stand the suffocating air of the house, but I had to come back. The reading of the will was today. When I walked through the front door, the smell hit me first. It used to smell like old paper and lemon polish. Now, it smelled of white tea and expensive, chemical florals. Elaine's scent. Nora. You made it. Elaine Turner glided into the foyer. She was 55 but looked a decade younger. Thanks to rigorous Pilates and the best dermatologists in Boston, she wore a cashmere cardigan the color of oatmeal and white trousers that dared the world to stain them. She reached out and pulled me into a hug that felt more like a restraint than an embrace. We were worried about the traffic, she said, pulling back to inspect me. You look pale. Dear, are you eating? I am fine. Elaine, I said, stepping out of her reach. Is Dad here? In the study with Camden, she said. We should head straight to the firm. Mr. Finch is expecting us at 2 o'clock. The drive to Holloway and Finch LLP was quiet. I sat in the back of my father's car while he drove. Elaine beside him, my father, Graham Turner, was a man who took up space even when he was silent. He had the kind of silver hair that inspired trust in shareholders and a jawline that had not softened with age. He watched the road with the same intensity he applied to his golf swing or his board meetings. We are just looking to wrap this up simply, Graham said, his eyes catching mine in the rearview mirror. Your mother wanted things handled discreetly. No fuss. Of course, I said. I assumed this was a formality. My mother came from money, old New England textile money that had been carefully stewarded for generations. When my grandfather died, he had set up a trust for me, managed by my parents until I turned 35. It was valued at $10 million. It was the safety net that allowed me to take risks, to be an artist, to live without the crushing anxiety of rent and health care. I had never touched the principal, living off my own salary, but knowing it was there was like having a steel spine. The law offices were encased in mahogany and silence. We were ushered into a conference room with a view of the harbor, where a man with a neck thick enough to wrestle steer sat behind a desk piled with files. This was Mr. Finch. He had been the family attorney since before I was born. Nora, Graham, Elaine, Mr. Finch said, nodding to each of us. Camden slumped in a chair in the corner, checking his phone. He was 26, the golden child of Graham and Elaine's union, possessing all of my father's charm and none of his work ethic. Mr. Finch cleared his throat and opened a thick leather binder. "We are here to review the final disposition of the estate of Catherine Turner," he began. His voice was a dry drone. He went through the house, which went to my father, the personal effects, which were largely left to me, the charitable bequests. Then, he turned a page. Regarding the Catherine Turner Family Trust, established 1992 for the benefit of Nora Turner. He read. I straightened in my chair. This was it, the transfer of control. I was 2 years away from the age of 35. But my mother had always told me she wanted me to have access sooner if she passed. Mr. Finch adjusted his glasses. As of the last accounting period, the trust has been substantially distributed in accordance with the discretionary powers granted to the trustees. The remaining balance is negligible, and the instrument is effectively no longer active. The room went absolutely still. The air conditioning hummed, a low mechanical vibration that seemed to rattle inside my skull. I stared at Mr. Finch's mouth, waiting for the punchline. "I am sorry," I said, my voice sounding very small. "What does that mean?" "It means the funds have been utilized," Mr. Finch said, not looking at me. He looked at a point somewhere over my left shoulder. "Utilized?" I repeated. The word felt slippery. Utilized for what? It was $10 million. Graham shifted in his seat. "Now, Nora, let's not get hysterical." "I am not hysterical," I said, my voice rising. "I am asking a question. How can a $10 million trust be empty? I never touched it. Your mother and I had wide latitude as trustees to invest and manage the assets," Graham said. He sounded bored, as if explaining why the gardener was late. "Over the years, markets shifted, opportunities arose. We made decisions as a family unit to leverage those assets for the greater good of the estate." "The greater good of the estate?" I looked at him, really looked at him. He was not looking at me. He was picking a piece of lint off his trousers. The trust was for me. "Dad, it was grandfather's money, for me. And you are part of this family," Elaine interjected, her voice soothing. "Syrup over razor blades. Your mother changed her mind. Nora, after you moved to Chicago, after you distanced yourself, she felt it was better to reinvest that capital into the family's broader interests rather than let it sit stagnant." "She changed her mind?" I asked, without telling me. "She wanted to protect you," Graham said. He finally looked at me, his eyes cold and blue. "You have never been good with responsibility. Nora, we both know that. Look at your life. You are scraping by as a freelancer. If you had access to that kind of capital, it would have ruined you." I felt like I had been slapped. "Scraping by? I was a senior art director. I was successful. I want to see the records." I said, "Mr. Finch closed the binder. The accounts have been audited and closed. Nora, everything was done strictly by the book. Show me the book," I said. "We can certainly arrange a summary at a later date," Graham said. Standing up, he checked his watch. "But right now, we have a lunch reservation at the club. This is a lot to process. I know, but it is gone. Nora, and frankly, it is for the best. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." I sat there as they gathered their coats. Camden shot me a look that might have been pity, or might have been amusement, before following them out. I was left alone in the conference room with the view of the harbor, the empty leather chair, and the realization that my entire future had just been erased with a few sentences. I did not go to lunch. I drove the rental car to the darkest corner of the parking lot and screamed until my throat felt raw. Then, I sat in the silence, watching a seagull pick at a discarded wrapper. My mother would not have done this. That was the thought I kept coming back to. My mother was quiet. Yes, she was often overshadowed by Graham's personality, but she was meticulous. She was protective. And she knew how much I valued my independence because it was the one thing she never really had. I needed proof. I drove to the First National Bank on Main Street. My mother had kept a safety deposit box there for 30 years. It was separate from the joint accounts she shared with Graham. I had the signatory power on it. She had added me when I turned 18, a just-in-case measure that I had forgotten about until this moment. The bank vault was cool and smelled of dust and copper. The clerk, a woman with gray hair who remembered my mother, left me alone in a small private room with a long metal box. I opened it, my hands trembling. It was mostly empty. The jewelry was gone, likely moved to the main safe at the house by Elaine. The bonds were gone. All that was left was a small, cream-colored envelope and a single key on a worn plastic tag. I picked up the envelope. It had my name on it, written in my mother's looping, elegant script. I tore it open. Nora, if you are reading this, I am gone, and things have become complicated. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was afraid of making it worse. I was afraid of what they would do if they knew I was watching. If anything feels off. Do not sign. Do not sign anything. Call L. Love. Mom. I stared at the note. The paper was heavy. Expensive. The ink was slightly smeared at the bottom, as if she had closed it quickly. Call L. Who was L? I looked at the key. It was a standard brass key, the kind you use for a padlock or a storage unit. The plastic tag was yellowed and cracked. Written on it in faded black marker was one word: Graybridge. Graybridge. It sounded like a town, or a street, or a bridge. I pulled out my phone and searched it. Nothing specific came up, just a few generic consulting firms and a bridge in the UK. I looked back at the note. Call L. Lydia. Lydia Crane. She had been my mother's best friend when I was a child. They had been inseparable. Two women navigating the shark tank of Briar Glen society. But about 5 years ago, right around the time I left for Chicago, Lydia had disappeared from our lives. My father had said they had a falling out. Elaine had hinted that Lydia had a drinking problem. I had never questioned it. I found Lydia's number in an old address book contact I had synced to my cloud years ago. I dialed it, expecting a disconnection message. Hello? The voice was raspy, guarded. Lydia? It is Nora. Nora Turner. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, a heavy exhale. Nora, I heard about Catherine. I'm so sorry. Lydia, I said, keeping my voice steady. I need to see you. I just found a note from my mother. She told me to call you. Another silence. Then, she spoke, her voice dropping to a whisper. Not on the phone. Do you know the diner on Route 9? The one with the neon sign that flickers? Yes. Meet me there in 30 minutes. And Nora? Make sure you were not followed. The diner was a relic of a less polished era, smelling of grease and burnt coffee. Lydia was sitting in a back booth, wearing a raincoat and sunglasses. Though it was overcast outside, she looked older than I remembered. The lines around her mouth were deep, and her hands, wrapped around a mug of black coffee, were shaking slightly. She took off the sunglasses when I sat down. Her eyes were red-rimmed. You look like her, Lydia said softly. God, you look like her. Lydia, what is going on? I asked. The trust fund is gone. Dad says Mom changed her mind. He says the money is gone. Lydia let out a short, bitter laugh. Changed her mind? Catherine would have cut off her own hand before she took a dime from you. That money was her apology to you. Nora, for staying with him, what do you mean? Your father? Lydia said, leaning in. He is a shark. Nora, but sharks need to keep swimming to breathe. And Graham? He has been swimming in debt for years. The lifestyle, the houses, the political ambitions. It all costs more than he makes. He burned through his own money a decade ago. Then he started burning through hers. And she let him? She did not know at first. He is good at hiding things. Shell companies, investments that look real on paper. By the time she caught on, she was sick, she was weak, and she was terrified. Terrified of what? Of being legally erased. Lydia said. That was the phrase she used. She said they were making her disappear on paper before she was even dead. changing titles, moving assets, updating powers of attorney. She tried to fight him. Nora, she started documenting it. She told me she had a file. A file? I asked. Where? I do not know. She never told me the location. She said it was safer if I did not know. But she said if anything happened, the key would be the answer. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key with the gray bridge tag. I placed it on the Formica table. Is this it? Lydia stared at the key. Her face went pale. Graybridge, she whispered. That is the name of the shell company. The one I found out about. The one they used to funnel the donations. What donations? The Turner Harbor Foundation, Lydia said. The charity. They use it like a personal piggy bank. I tried to report it to the board 5 years ago. That is why they destroyed me. Nora, that is why I lost my job, my reputation, my friends. Graham told everyone I was embezzling. He threatened to have me arrested if I did not sign a non-disclosure agreement and leave town. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. My father had destroyed his wife's best friend to cover his tracks. What do I do? I asked. Lydia reached out and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was dry and cold. Be careful. Nora, these people, they do not play by the rules. They make the rules. If you go after them, they will come for you. They will try to make you look crazy. They will try to buy you off. And if that does not work... She trailed off, looking out the window at the parking lot. You need to find out what that key opens, she said. And you need a lawyer, not one from here. Someone who hates Briar Glen. I left Lydia shaking in the booth and drove straight to the offices of Marrowgate Private Partners. They were the wealth management firm that handled the Turner family assets. If the money had been moved, it had moved through them. The building was a glass monolith in the center of the financial district. I walked up to the reception desk, my heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. I am Nora Turner. I told the receptionist, a young woman with a headset who looked like she had been genetically engineered to be unhelpful. I need to speak to the account manager for the Catherine Turner Trust. One moment, please. She tapped on her keyboard, her face blank. A few minutes later, a man in a blue suit walked out. He had a smile that did not reach his eyes. Ms. Turner, he said, extending a hand. I am David Joyner. I am afraid we cannot discuss client details without an appointment. I am the beneficiary. I said, ignoring his hand. I want to see the transaction history. Mr. Joyner sighed. A sound of professional patience. Ms. Turner, as we explained to your father, the trust is no longer active, and since the trustees were the authorized signatories, we can only release detailed records to them. I am the beneficiary, I repeated, my voice hardening. It was my money, was Mr. Joyner corrected gently. The trust structure gave the trustees full discretion. We acted on their instructions. If you have questions, you really need to speak with Mrs. Turner. Elaine is the current executor of the estate. He was stonewalling me. It was a wall of polite bureaucracy, designed to keep people like me out. So you are telling me you helped my father drain $10 million and you will not show me where it went? Mr. Joyner's smile vanished. That is a serious accusation. Ms. Turner, I would suggest you leave before I call security. I drove back to the house, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the lawn. When I walked in, Elaine was in the kitchen, arranging flowers in a crystal vase. She looked up, her expression a mask of concern. Nora, where have you been? We were worried. You missed lunch. I went for a drive. I lied. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked over to the island, where a thick stack of documents sat waiting. Well, I am glad you are back. Graham and I were talking. We know this is hard for you. The money. It is a shock. We get that. She picked up the documents and held them out to me. We want to help you. Nora, a fresh start. We are willing to give you a substantial gift. $200,000 to help you get settled back in Chicago. $200,000. It was a lot of money to most people. To me, it was 2% of what they had stolen. And what do I have to do? I asked, taking the packet. Just sign these, Elaine said, smiling. It is just standard cleanup paperwork, waiving any future claims against the estate, acknowledging the closure of the trust. It simplifies everything. We can wire the money tomorrow. I looked down at the papers. They were dense, full of legal jargon, release of liability, indemnification. I flipped through the pages. On the third page, I noticed something. The signature block for witness was missing, and on the final page, the notary section was blank. No date, no stamp. If I signed this, they could fill in the notary date for any time they wanted. They could make it look like I had signed it months ago, before I even knew the money was gone. They could use this to prove I consented to everything. I cannot sign this right now. I said, I need to read it. Elaine's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Of course, but we need it by the morning. Nora, the accountants are pushing us to close the books for the quarter. I will read it tonight. I said, that evening. The house was full of people. My father was hosting a small gathering for the hospital board, a fundraiser disguised as a cocktail party. I stayed in my room for as long as I could, listening to the murmur of voices and the clinking of glass from downstairs. Eventually, hunger drove me out. I crept down the back stairs, intending to raid the kitchen and retreat. The living room was packed. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns stood in clusters, laughing. I saw my father holding court near the fireplace, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking like the benevolent patriarch. I moved through the crowd, keeping my head down. As I passed a group of young men near the bar, I heard a familiar voice. It is going to be state-of-the-art, Camden was saying. He was holding a martini, leaning against a marble pillar. We are breaking ground on the new pediatric wing next month. That is impressive. Cam, one of the men said, that kind of capital is hard to raise quickly. Camden laughed. It was a wet, arrogant sound. Well, you know what they say. Family money is the best kind of venture capital. Let us just say my sister's college fund paid for the bricks. The group laughed. It was a low, conspiratorial chuckle, a laugh that said, we know the game, and we won. I froze. He was not even hiding it. He was bragging about it. My sister's college fund. He was turning my theft into a punchline for his rich friends. The room seemed to tilt. My breath caught in my throat. I felt the panic rising. A hot tide in my chest. I needed air. I needed to get out. I stumbled into the powder room off the hallway and locked the door. I sank to the floor, my back against the wood, gasping for air. They stole it. They stole it all, and they are laughing about it. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound of the party, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the sound of my life being cannibalized to feed their vanity. I sat there for 5 minutes, hyperventilating, then 10 minutes. Then, the tears stopped. I looked at myself in the mirror. My mascara was smeared. My face was blotchy. But my eyes looked different. The fear was gone, replaced by something cold and hard. They thought I was weak. They thought I was the artist's daughter, the one who could be bought off with $200,000 and a pat on the head. They thought I would go back to Chicago and cry about it. I washed my face. I fixed my makeup. I smoothed my hair. I unlocked the door and walked back out into the party. I did not hide this time. I walked through the room, moving silently. I pulled out my phone. I took a picture of Camden laughing with the developers. I took a picture of the donor plaque mock-up sitting on the easel, listing the Graham and Elaine Turner family as the platinum benefactors. I walked into my father's study, which was empty for the moment. The desk was cluttered with papers for the meeting. I photographed the guest list. I photographed a receipt for catering services that was billed to Graybridge Strategies. I was done asking for answers. I was done asking for permission. I was going to burn their perfect lives to the ground. But first, I was going to make sure I had the matches. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked into the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water. Elaine walked in a moment later, flushed from hosting. "Did you sign the papers, dear?" she asked, touching my arm. I looked at her. I smiled. It was the best acting performance of my life. "Not yet," I said. "I am just going over the fine print. You know how I am." Elaine laughed. "Oh, Nora, Always the worrier. Just don't take too long. We want to help you move on. I watched her walk away, back to the party, back to the applause. Move on. I thought, oh, I am moving, but you are not going to like where I'm going. I went back upstairs, took the Fresh Start packet out of my bag, and laid it on the bed. I took a photo of the missing witness line. I took a photo of the blank notary section. Then I opened my laptop and started a new folder. I named it The Fire. I needed a lawyer who did not play golf with my father. That was the only criteria I had when I opened my laptop in the sterile silence of my hotel room. In Briar Glen, every attorney was either on the board of the hospital or a member of the yacht club, and their loyalty to Graham Turner ran deeper than their oath to the bar. I had to go outside the blast radius. I found Renee Sloan in a brick building in South Boston that smelled of roasted coffee and wet pavement. Her office was not encased in mahogany like Holloway and Finch. It was functional, cluttered with bankers' boxes, and illuminated by the harsh white light of a rainy Tuesday. Renee did not offer me tea. She did not ask about my flight or offer condolences for my mother. She sat behind a metal desk, wearing a charcoal blazer that looked like she had slept in it, and stared at me with eyes that were sharp, dark, and utterly unimpressed by my last name. So let me get this straight, Renee said. She leaned back, tapping a pen against her chin. You are the beneficiary of a $10 million irrevocable trust. Your father and stepmother are the trustees. They claim the money is gone, spent on investments and lifestyle maintenance, and they want you to sign a release for a fraction of the value. Yes, I said, and they are pressuring you to sign fast. Yes, they said it was for tax purposes. Renee snorted. It is never for tax purposes. Ms. Turner, it is because they are bleeding, and they need to cauterize the wound before you realize you are the one holding the scalpel. She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her. I can handle the litigation, she said. I enjoy eating people like your father for breakfast, but proving fiduciary breach is not just about showing the money is gone. We have to prove they spent it on themselves while pretending it was for you. That is a specific kind of accounting magic. She looked at me, her expression softening just a fraction. I need one thing from you before we start, she said. What is that? I need your mother's last clean signature. I frowned. What do you mean, clean? Renee stopped tapping the pen. I mean from before she got sick, before the medication, before the brain fog. If we are going to contest any documents they produce, amendments, powers of attorney, authorizations, I need a baseline. I need to know what her hand looked like when she was still herself, because I guarantee you, somewhere in that paper trail, her signature is going to start looking a lot like your stepmother's handwriting. I felt a lump form in my throat. I dug into my bag and pulled out my passport. My mother was my emergency contact. She had signed the renewal form with me 4 years ago, sitting at her kitchen table, drinking Earl Grey tea. Use this, I said, sliding it across the desk. Renee nodded. Good. Now, meet Harper. She pressed a button on her desk phone, and a moment later, a man walked in. Harper Ives looked less like an accountant and more like an adjunct professor of philosophy. He wore a corduroy jacket with patches on the elbows and carried a laptop covered in stickers. Harper, this is the Turner file, Renee said. 10 million. Vanished. Harper sat down and opened his laptop. He didn't look at me. He looked at the data Renee had already forwarded him. Families do not steal, Harper said, his voice quiet and precise. Not in the way you think. They do not walk into the vault and stuff cash into duffel bags. That is too messy. It leaves fingerprints. Then how did they do it? I asked. Harper turned the screen toward me. It showed a diagram of intersecting circles. They borrow, he said. They lend money from the trust to a shell company they own. The shell company invests in bad real estate or pays for consulting fees. The money is gone. But on the books, it looks like a bad investment loss, not a theft, or they charge management fees. Your father creates a company to manage the trust's assets, and that company charges the trust $500,000 a year for administrative oversight. $500,000? I asked. To manage money that was just sitting there? It is legal if the trust document allows for reasonable compensation, Harper said, and I am willing to bet the definition of reasonable in your trust is very broad. Then there are the charitable pledges. They pledge $1 million to a museum to get their name on a wall, but they pay the pledge using trust assets. You pay the bill. They get the social capital. It sounded exhausting. It sounded like a full-time job just to move the money around. We need the statements, Renee said. The real ones, not the summaries they show you. I cannot get them. I said. Marrowgate stonewalled me. Harper smiled. It was a small, predatory smile. You cannot get them from the front door, but money always leaves a trail. You just have to know where to look for the exhaust fumes. I went back to the hotel and opened my laptop. I had been avoiding my digital archives, photos of my mother, old emails, the debris of a life I had left behind, but Harper's words about a trail stuck with me. I logged into my old college email account, the one I hadn't used in years. It was full of spam and newsletters, but I searched for my mother's email address. Most of our correspondence was mundane, recipes, updates on the weather, questions about my job, but then I saw it, an email from 2 years ago, titled simply, "For later." I clicked it. There was no text in the body, just an attachment, a zip file. I tried to open it. A password prompt appeared. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried her birthday. Incorrect. I tried my birthday. Incorrect. I tried the name of her first dog. Incorrect. I closed my eyes and pictured the safety deposit box. The note. Call L. The key tag. Graybridge. I typed it in. GREYBRIDGE. The folder unlocked. Inside were scans, dozens of them, but they were not bank statements. They were photographs of documents taken hastily, some blurry, some at odd angles. It looked like she had been photographing papers on a desk when no one was looking. I zoomed in on one. It was a memo from Graham to Elaine. Subject: Liquidity requirements for Pavilion Pledge. Elaine, we are short on the initial draw for the hospital commitment. I am authorizing a transfer from the CT Trust to cover the gap. We will characterize it as a bridge loan to the foundation. Have Finch draft the promissory note. A bridge loan, sourced from my trust, to pay for their hospital wing. I scrolled further. There was a photo of a handwritten ledger, my mother's handwriting. June 4th, $50,000 to Graybridge Strategies. Invoice says consulting. No consultant met with us. August 12th, $12,000 to Amex. Graham said it was business expense. Bill shows flights to Cabo. She knew. She had known for 2 years. I grabbed the brass key from my pocket. If Graybridge was the password, the key had to lead to something physical, something she couldn't digitize. I searched my mother's credit card history, one of the few things I had access to as the executor of her personal effects. I looked for recurring charges. There. Safekeep Storage. Route 1, $35 a month. I drove out there immediately. It was a bleak facility. Rows of orange metal doors surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. I went to the office and showed them my appointment as executor. The man behind the counter, who smelled of stale tobacco, handed me a gate code. Unit 412, he said. I drove to the back of the lot. The unit was small, barely the size of a closet. I slid the key into the padlock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy click. I rolled up the metal door. The air inside was stagnant and cold. There was only one thing in the unit: a plastic file box sitting on a wooden pallet. I sat down on the concrete floor and opened the box. Inside were the originals. The original trust deed from 1992. Signed by my grandfather. I flipped through it. Section 8.4. Trustee compensation. Trustees shall serve without compensation, save for reimbursement of direct expenses, without compensation. I pulled out another file. It was a ledger, a physical version of the notes in the email, but more detailed. My mother had tracked dates, amounts, and excuses Graham had given her, and at the bottom of the box, taped to the inside cover, was a silver thumb drive labeled Board Minutes. I plugged it into my laptop right there, sitting on the cold concrete. The drive contained minutes from the meetings of the Turner Harbor Foundation. I opened a file from last year, Motion to approve grant of $200,000 to the Briar Glen Cultural Center. Motion carried. Funding source: restricted donation from C. Turner Trust. I felt sick. The Turner Harbor Foundation was their glory engine. They were using my money to play philanthropist. They were taking my inheritance, funneling it into their foundation, and then donating it to the town to get their names on buildings. Nora Turner paid for the wing. Camden had said. He was not joking. He was stating a literal fact. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking. But not from fear. I was shaking from rage. A cold, quiet rage that felt like ice water in my veins. They had stolen my future to buy their reputation. 2 days later, I put on a navy dress and heels and drove to the Briar Glen Country Club. The Turner Harbor Foundation was hosting its annual autumn gala. I was not invited, but as a Turner, no one stopped me at the door. The ballroom was transformed into a harvest fantasy. Pumpkins sprayed gold, centerpieces of wheat and autumn roses, and 300 of the town's elite sipping champagne. I stood in the back, near the bar, sipping a club soda. I saw Graham working the room, his hand on the shoulder of the mayor. I saw Camden flirting with a group of debutantes near the band. And then, the lights dimmed. Elaine walked onto the stage. The spotlight hit her, turning her hair into a halo of spun gold. She looked radiant, benevolent. "Thank you all for coming," she said into the microphone. Her voice was warm, trembling with just the right amount of emotion. "Tonight is about community. It is about legacy." She paused, looking out over the crowd. "My husband and I believe that we are merely stewards of our good fortune," she continued. "When we built the Turner Harbor Foundation, we did it with a simple mission: to give back until it hurts, to sacrifice our own comfort so that this town, our home, can thrive." Applause rippled through the room. I watched her face on the large projection screens. She was tearing up. "We have faced challenges this year," she said, her voice catching. "Losing Catherine was a blow to us all, but I know she would want us to continue this work. She would want us to pour everything we have into the future." The room erupted in applause. People stood up. Graham walked onto the stage and kissed her cheek. It was a perfect tableau of grief and generosity. And the terrifying thing was, Elaine was not lying. I could see it in her eyes. She believed it. She believed she was the hero. She believed that stealing my money to build a hospital wing was a moral act. She had convinced herself that because I was absent, I was unworthy, and that she, the active present wife, was the rightful steward of that power. She did not see herself as a thief. She saw herself as a martyr. I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see a woman in a caterer's uniform holding a tray of empty glasses. But she was not looking at the glasses. She was looking at me. "You are Nora, right?" she whispered. I nodded. "I am Jessa," she said. "Jessa Lorne. We were in Girl Scouts together. Troop 482. Recognition flickered. Jessa Lorne, the girl who used to eat paste and tell the best ghost stories. Now, she had sharp eyes and a messy bun. "Jessa," I said, "I did not know you were working the event?" She finished with a wry smile. "I am not. I am undercover. I write for the Gazette now, and the shrimp puffs are the best place to overhear gossip." She glanced at the stage, where Elaine was accepting a bouquet of roses. "That was quite a speech," Jessa said. "Family sacrifice. A bit rich. Coming from a woman who just bought a Bentley." I looked at her sharply. "You know about the Bentley?" "Everyone knows about the Bentley," Jessa said. "And the renovation. And the trips. People in this town talk. Nora, they know the Turners are spending money like water. They just do not know where the water is coming from." She leaned in closer. "I heard you were back," she said, "and I heard things are tense. If you ever want to talk, on the record, or off, I am listening." I looked at her. It was so tempting to just spill it all right there, to tell her about the empty trust, the fake loans, the stolen signature, to let her blow it up in the morning paper. But then I looked at the crowd. They were cheering for my father. If I spoke out now, without all the proof, without the legal stranglehold Renee was building, I would just look like the jealous, bitter daughter. Graham would spin it. He would say I was unstable. He would say I was greedy. I cannot. I said, not yet. Jessa nodded. She understood. Here, she said, slipping a cocktail napkin into my hand. My number. When you are ready to burn it down, give me a call. I will bring the gasoline. The next morning, I met Harper and Renee at a coffee shop halfway between Briar Glen and Boston. I handed Harper the thumb drive and the ledger. This is good, Harper said, scrolling through the files. This is very good. He turned his laptop around. I ran a trace on Graybridge Strategies, he said. The consulting firm your mother flagged. It has no website, no employees on LinkedIn, no business license filed in the state registry. So it is a ghost, I said. Not entirely, Harper said. It has a mailing address. Suite 402 at One Financial Place. That is the Marrowgate building. I said, exactly, Harper said. And it is not just the same building. I cross-referenced the floor plans. Suite 402 is inside the Marrowgate internal offices. It is a broom closet. Nora, or a mail drop. Your father and his wealth manager created a fake company. Build Your Trust for consulting, and mailed the checks to themselves. That is fraud, Renee said. That is straight up, go to prison fraud. Can we use it? I asked. Renee shook her head. Not yet. If we accuse them of fraud now, they will shred everything. They will claim Graybridge was a legitimate vendor that just closed down. We need to catch them moving the money in real time. We need to find the pressure point. We need to know why they are doing it now. Harper added, they drained the trust slowly for years, but the records show a massive acceleration in the last 6 months. Almost $2 million pulled out in cash transfers. They are desperate. Why? I thought about Camden, the new wing. Family money is the best venture capital. Camden, I said, he is building something. Lake Point Row, a luxury condo complex on the waterfront. Harper typed furiously. Lake Point Row. Let me see. He pulled up a property record. Here it is, he said. Developer. Turner Development Group. Financing. Highly leveraged. Bridge loans coming due next month. He looked up at me. He is underwater. Nora. The project is over budget. The lenders are calling the loans. If he does not pay them back in 30 days, the bank takes the land. That is where the money went. I said, they stripped my trust to save Camden's condos, and to save their own reputation. Renee said, if that project fails, your father looks like a fool. He loses his status. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Graham. Dinner tonight? Just the two of us. The boathouse. 7 o'clock. I showed it to Renee. Go, she said. But do not eat anything, and do not sign anything. Let him talk. Let him think he is managing you. The boathouse was the kind of restaurant where the menus had no prices, and the waiters whispered. My father was waiting at a corner table, a bottle of wine already open. Nora, he said, standing up to kiss my cheek. You look tired. Are you sleeping? I am fine. Dad, I said, sitting down. He poured me a glass of wine. I did not touch it. We need to talk about this situation, he said, clasping his hands on the tablecloth. Elaine is very upset. She feels like you are attacking her. I am not attacking anyone. I said, I just want to see the records. Nora, listen to me, he said, his voice dropping to that reasonable, fatherly register that used to make me feel safe. We did what we had to do, the trust. It was a complicated instrument. The markets were volatile. We moved the assets to protect the family. To protect the family? I asked. Or to protect Camden's condo project? Graham's eyes narrowed. Who told you about that? It is a small town. Dad, he sighed, looking disappointed. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You are listening to gossip. You are getting paranoid. He leaned in. You know, Nora, we have always worried about you. Your mother and I. You have always been fragile. I stiffened. Fragile? Remember the trouble you had in college? He said softly. The anxiety? The therapy? We supported you through that. We paid for the best doctors. But we always knew you struggled with reality when you were under stress. I stared at him. I had seen a therapist for 6 months in college after a bad breakup. It was normal. It was healthy. And now he was holding it like a knife. Are you saying I am crazy? I asked. I am saying you are emotional, he said. And if you start making wild accusations, claiming we stole from you, dragging our names through the mud, people are going to look at your history. They are going to see a young woman who could not handle the pressure of her own life, a woman who is lashing out because she is jealous of her brother's success. He took a sip of wine. We want to protect you from that. Nora, we do not want people to think you are unstable. It was a threat, a beautifully wrapped, soft-spoken threat. Shut up, or we will tell the world you are mentally ill. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike. The man who had walked me down the aisle at my sister's wedding. No, I did not have a sister. That was a memory from a movie. I had no one. I was an only child of this marriage. I was alone. I realized then that he did not love me. He loved the idea of me. He loved the version of me that reflected well on him. But the moment I became an inconvenience, I was disposable. I stood up. I am not hungry. I said, Nora, sit down, he commanded. His voice had an edge now. I am done. Dad, I walked out. I walked past the maitre d', past the valet stand, and out into the cool night air. I walked to my rental car in the dark corner of the lot. I got in and locked the doors. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. I opened the voice memo app and hit record. I am done being managed. I said into the darkness, I am done being the good daughter. They want to paint me as crazy? Fine. I will show them what crazy looks like. I stopped the recording. I texted Renee. He threatened me. He is going to use my medical history against me. Prepare the filing. I want to freeze everything. We go to war tomorrow. The war room smelled of stale takeout curry and ozone. It was 1 a.m, and the rain was lashing against the windows of Renee Sloane's office in South Boston. Harper Ives was hunched over a light box, a device that looked like a glowing medical table, examining 2 sheets of paper with a jeweler's loupe. Come look at this, Harper said. His voice was tight, the sound of a man who had just found a crack in the foundation of a skyscraper. I walked over, rubbing my eyes. I had not slept well since the dinner with my father. His threat to paint me as unstable was looping in my head, a poisonous mantra. What is it? Renee asked, joining us. She was holding a mug of coffee that I was fairly certain was cold. Harper pointed to the document on the left. It was the copy of the trust deed my father's lawyers had provided, the updated version. On the right was one of the faded photocopies from my mother's storage unit. Look at page 14, Harper said, specifically, section 9. I squinted. On the document from my mother's box, section 9 was titled, Appointment of Trust Protector. The text was dense, but the gist was clear. The settlor hereby appoints a trust protector with the authority to remove and replace trustees in the event of malfeasance, negligence, or failure to act in the best interest of the beneficiary. I looked at the document from Holloway and Finch. Page 14 looked almost identical. Same font, same margins, but section 9 was gone. It had been replaced by a generic clause about administrative powers. They deleted the protector clause, I said. Harper shook his head. No, they did not just delete it. Look at the page number. I looked closer. On the original, the page number 14 was in Times New Roman. On the lawyer's copy, it was also Times New Roman, but it was slightly sharper, bolder. They swapped the page. Harper said, they took the original trust instrument, physically removed the page containing the protector clause, drafted a new page that looked visually identical but contained harmless text, and slipped it back in. Then they photocopied the whole thing to hide the paper texture difference. It is a Frankenstein document, Renee said, slamming her mug down, a stitched-together corpse. They knew that if you saw the protector clause, you might try to trigger it, so they buried it. What is a protector? I asked. I had never heard the term. Renee turned to me, her eyes gleaming. It is the nuclear option. Nora, a trustee holds the money, a beneficiary receives the money, but a protector? A protector is a third party. usually a close friend or advisor, who watches the watchers. They have one job: to fire the trustees if they go rogue. If your grandfather put a protector clause in there, he did not trust your father completely even back then. Who is it? I asked. Who is the protector? That is the problem, Harper said. He slid the original document over. At the bottom of Section 9, where the name should be, there was a smudge, a heavy, deliberate smear of black toner, as if someone had run a dirty thumb over the glass of the copier 30 years ago. It is illegible, Harper said, and in the lawyer's version, the page does not even exist. I felt a surge of frustration. We were so close. We knew there was a weapon, but we could not find the trigger. Wait, I said. I grabbed the papers. Every legal document has to be notarized. My mother's copy. Look at the last page. I flipped to the signature page of the original 1992 deed. There were the signatures. My grandfather, my father, my mother, and below them, the notary's stamp. Witnessed by Samuel J. Paris, Notary Public. Paris is dead. Renee said. I checked. Died in 2010. But look at the log number, I said, pointing to the handwritten code next to the stamp. BK 42, PG 118. Notaries have to keep a logbook, a journal of every document they stamp. If Paris was meticulous, he would have written down the names of everyone who signed that day, including the protector, if they were present to accept the appointment. Renee looked at me with new respect. You are learning. Where do old notary logs go when the notary dies? I asked. Usually to the state archives, Renee said, or the trash. Let us hope for the archives. It took Harper 6 hours to track down the archives of Samuel J. Paris. They were not in a state warehouse. They were in the basement of the local library in Briar Glen, part of a historical records donation Paris's widow had made years ago. I drove out there myself. The librarian, a woman who looked like she was made of dried lavender and parchment, brought me a dusty ledger bound in red leather. I turned the pages carefully. 1991, 1992, March, April, May. There it was, May 12th, 1992, Catherine Turner. Family Trust. Signatories, Arthur Turner, Graham Turner, Catherine Turner, and below them, acceptance of protector. Appointment, Malcolm Reed. I froze. I knew that name. Dr. Malcolm Reed. He had been a professor of ethics at the university where my mother sat on the alumni board. I remembered him coming to the house when I was a teenager. He was a quiet man, always wearing tweed jackets, always smelling of pipe tobacco. He and my mother used to sit in the sunroom and talk for hours about moral obligations and civic duty. My father had always hated him. He called him the conscience of the county, and he did not mean it as a compliment. I took a photo of the logbook entry and sent it to Renee. Got him, I typed. Dr. Reed lived 3 hours north, in a small town in New Hampshire called Hanover. He had retired 10 years ago. I drove up the next morning. The leaves were further along here, a blazing canopy of scarlet and gold that made the road feel like a tunnel of fire. I found his house at the end of a dirt road. It was a modest A-frame cabin with a stack of firewood on the porch and a view of the White Mountains that would have cost millions in Briar Glen. I knocked on the door. My heart was thumping. What if he was senile? What if he was loyal to my father? What if he had forgotten? The door opened. Malcolm Reed stood there. He was older, his hair completely white, his posture slightly stooped, but his eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses were sharp and clear. Nora, he said. He did not sound surprised. He sounded resigned. Dr. Reed. I said, I need to talk to you. He sighed and stepped back. Come in. I have the tea kettle on. The inside of the cabin was lined with books, floor to ceiling. It felt like a fortress of knowledge. He poured 2 cups of tea and sat in a worn leather armchair, motioning for me to take the sofa. I assumed this day would come, he said softly. I just hoped it would not be so soon. You knew? I asked. You knew about the trust? I helped your grandfather draft the ethical guidelines for it. He said, he was a good man. Nora, He knew wealth could be a poison. He wanted to make sure there was an antidote. He appointed you as the protector. I said, yes, to ensure the trustees acted with fiduciary and moral integrity. Then where were you? I asked, the anger slipping into my voice. Where were you when they drained it? Where were you when they turned my inheritance into a slush fund for their vanity projects? Reed looked down at his tea. I wanted to intervene. Nora, 5 years ago, when the withdrawals started to look irregular, I contacted your mother, and she begged me not to. He said. I stared at him. She begged you not to? She was terrified. Reed said, not of poverty. She was terrified of war. She told me that Graham was leveraging everything, the house, the reputation, the future, on a series of high-risk plays. She said if I triggered the protector clause and removed him as trustee, the house of cards would collapse while she was still alive. She was sick. Nora, she did not have the strength for a legal battle. She just wanted peace. So she let him rob me? No, Reed said firmly. She made a deal with me. She said, Malcolm, if Nora comes to you, if she finds her voice, if she finds the truth on her own, then you help her. But do not start the fire for her. She has to be the one to strike the match. He looked at me. His eyes were sad and infinitely kind. She wanted you to be ready. Nora. She feared financial suffocation. Yes, but she feared you being a victim more. She wanted you to fight, and she knew you would not fight until you were backed into a corner. I felt the tears prickling my eyes, but I blinked them back. This was not the time for grief. I am in the corner, Dr. Reed, and I am ready to fight. He nodded slowly. He stood up and walked to a bookshelf. He pulled down a hollowed-out volume of the Nicomachean Ethics and removed a folded document. This is my acceptance of the appointment, he said. And this, he pulled out a second document, is a pre-drafted instrument of removal. I wrote it 5 years ago. It cites specific breaches of fiduciary duty. All it needs is a current date and my signature. He placed the paper on the coffee table between us. If I sign this, Nora, it is war. Your father will lose control of the trust immediately, but it will also trigger a chain reaction. The loans guaranteed by the trust will be called. The assets will be frozen. Your family's reputation will be glass under a hammer. Are you sure you want to do this? I thought about the fresh start packet. I thought about Camden's laugh at the party. I thought about my father's threat to call me crazy. Sign it, I said. I drove back to Briar Glen with the signed removal instrument in my bag. It felt heavy, like I was carrying a loaded gun. But Renee warned me we could not fire it yet. We have the kill shot, Renee said over the phone. But we need to make sure we hit the vital organs. If we remove him now, he will claim it is an administrative error. He will fight the validity of the protector clause. We need to tie the removal to a specific, undeniable crime. We need to prove where the money went. Harper had been busy while I was in New Hampshire. When I got back to the office, he had a map of Briar Glen taped to the wall. Red string connected the Turner Harbor Foundation, Gray Bridge Strategies, and a large plot of land on the waterfront. Lake Point Row, Harper said. Tapping the map, it is the key. He pulled up a spreadsheet. Camden's development company is the developer of record. But look at the financing. He has a construction loan from a regional bank for $20 million, but the bank required 20% equity, $4 million cash, before they would release the funds. Camden does not have $4 million, I said. He leases his car. Exactly, Harper said. So where did the equity come from? He traced a line with his finger. From the Turner Harbor Foundation. But that is illegal, I said. A nonprofit cannot invest in a for-profit luxury condo project owned by a family member. That is self-dealing. It is, Harper said. Unless they disguise it, they labeled the transfer as a program-related investment for urban revitalization. They claimed Lake Point Row would include a community center. Does it? I asked. Harper pulled up the blueprints. Not a single square foot. It is all luxury condos and retail. They lied to the IRS. They lied to the bank. And they used your trust fund, laundered through the foundation. to provide the equity that unlocked the bank loan. And here is the kicker, Harper continued. The construction loan is a balloon note. It matures in 2 months. If the project is not finished and units sold by then, the bank calls the full $20 million, and the project is not finished. I said, it is barely a skeleton. Harper said, they are out of cash. The contractors have walked off the job. I sat back. The pieces were falling into place. My father and Elaine were not just greedy. They were drowning. They had bet everything on Camden's project, using my money as the ante. If the project failed, the bank would foreclose, the foundation would be audited, and the fraud would be exposed. They need more money. I said, that is why they wanted me to sign the release. They need to drain the last dregs of the trust to pay the contractors and finish the building. And it is not just money, Renee said. It is status. She slid a newspaper clipping across the desk. Gazette headline, Graham Turner, poised to lead Medical Pavilion Board. And another, Elaine Turner, shortlisted for State Arts Council. Your father's chairmanship is contingent on his financial stewardship, Renee said, and Elaine's appointment depends on her reputation as a philanthropist. If the Lake Point scandal breaks, if it comes out that they are raiding a charity to fund a failing condo project, they lose everything, the money, the titles, the social standing. They are standing on a trap door. I said, and I'm holding the lever. I needed to look him in the eye one last time. I needed to see if there was anything left of the father I thought I had. I drove to the house. It was late afternoon, the light golden and deceptive. The landscapers were blowing leaves off the driveway. Everything looked so perfect. Graham was in the sunroom, reading a report. He looked up when I walked in, removing his reading glasses. Nora, he said, I did not expect you. Have you come to your senses? I stood in the doorway. I did not sit. I know about Lake Point. Dad, I said. His face did not change. He was a master of the mask. I do not know what you mean. I know you used the trust to fund the equity. I said, I know you funneled it through the foundation. I know the bank is calling the loan. Graham set his glasses down on the table. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the bay. You have been busy, he said. His voice was calm, too calm. Why? I asked. Why did you do it? You had everything. Why did you have to take mine? He turned around. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was pity. Because you were not using it. Nora. The words hung in the air. I was not using it? I repeated. It was my safety net. It was my future. It was stagnant capital, Graham said, as if explaining economics to a child. $10 million sitting in low-yield bonds? It was a waste. We are builders. Nora, we create things. We built the foundation. We are building the hospital wing. We are building the skyline of this town. You are building a condo complex for Camden. I said, we are building a legacy, he snapped, his composure cracking for a second. Something that lasts. What is your legacy? Nora? Some graphic design awards? A rented apartment in Chicago? He walked toward me. We did what responsible stewards do. We put the capital to work, and when Lake Point sells out, the money will go back into the trust. With interest, you will be whole. You just have to be patient. Patient? I asked. You stole it. We borrowed it, he corrected, and we will pay it back. But if you blow this up now, if you go to the lawyers or the press, you destroy the only way we have of repaying you. You sink the ship while you are still on it. He stopped in front of me. Grow up. Nora. This is how the world works. Money moves. It does not sit still for little girls who are afraid to spend it. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the fear behind his eyes. He was not a titan of industry. He was a gambler who had doubled down on a losing hand, and he was furious that I was refusing to be his chips. That calmness, that absolute entitlement, broke something inside me. It broke the last tether of childhood hope that maybe, just maybe, he loved me. He did not love me. He viewed me as an asset, and an underperforming one at that. I will not sign. Dad. I said quietly. He stared at me. Then I will ruin you. Nora, I have the medical records. I have the lawyers. I will bury you in litigation until you are 50. I turned and walked out. I did not slam the door. I closed it gently. Back at the office, Renee was pacing. We have enough for a demand letter, she said. We can file a petition for an accounting. No, Harper said. If we file a petition, they get notice. They have 20 days to respond. In those 20 days, they will shred the Graybridge files. They will fabricate board minutes. They will move the last of the money offshore. Harper is right. I said, Dad is cornered. If we tip him off, he will scorch the earth. So what do we do? Renee asked. I stood up. I go to Marrowgate. They will not talk to you. Renee said, they kicked you out. They will talk to me if I cause a scene. I said, but not a loud scene, a legal scene. I am going with you. Renee said, no. I said, if you come. They clam up. They call their general counsel. I need to go in as the confused, worried beneficiary. I need to get into the back room. It is risky. Nora, Harper warned, I have the protector removal instrument. I said, patting my bag, if things go south, I pull it out, but I need to know what they are doing today. I wore the same clothes I had worn to the funeral, black, modest, sympathetic. I walked into the lobby of Marrowgate Private Partners at 10 in the morning. I did not go to the reception desk. I walked straight toward the glass doors that led to the inner offices. Ms. Turner, the receptionist called out. You cannot go back there. I ignored her. I pushed through the doors. Heads turned. Account managers in expensive suits looked up from their desks. I need to see David Joyner, I said loudly. Now! A security guard started walking toward me. I am not leaving until I see the compliance officer, I shouted. I want to know why my social security number is attached to a shell company in Suite 402. The room went silent. The mention of compliance and shell company in a wealth management firm is like shouting bomb on an airplane. A door opened. A woman in a gray suit stepped out. She looked terrified. This was not David Joyner. This was the chief compliance officer. I could tell by the way she was sweating. Ms. Turner, she said, please, come into my office. Let us not make a disturbance. She ushered me into a small, windowless room and closed the door. I am Sarah Jenkins, she said. I am the compliance director. What is this about a shell company? I know about Graybridge. I said, I bluffed. I know you are running it out of this building. I know my father is using it to launder trust money, and I know you signed off on it. Her face went ashen. I did not sign off on anything. Mr. Joyner handles the Turner account directly, but you are the compliance officer. I said, if the SEC comes looking, whose name is on the license? Yours. She swallowed hard. I want to see the queue. I said, I want to see pending transfers. I cannot show you that, she whispered. It is a violation of privacy. I leaned forward. Sarah, my lawyer has a draft complaint on her desk naming you personally as a co-conspirator in a $10 million fraud scheme. If you help me, I tell her you cooperated. If you don't, you go down with Joyner and my father. She looked at the door. She looked at her computer. She typed quickly. Her hands were shaking. She hit print. She grabbed the paper from the tray and slid it across the desk. Face down. I did not give this to you, she hissed. You found it. I picked it up. It was a screenshot of the pending transaction queue for the Catherine Turner Trust. There was only one line item. Transfer to Lake Point Construction, LLC. Amount, $1,200,000. Status, pending approval. Scheduled date, October 14th, 9 a.m. I looked at the date on my phone. Today was October 11th. I have 72 hours. I said. Sarah nodded. Once that transfer clears, the account is zeroed out. The trust is closed. I stood up. Thank you. Sarah, I walked out of the office. Clutching the paper, I did not look at David Joyner, who was rushing down the hallway toward me. I walked straight to the elevator. I stepped out into the street and called Renee. They are draining the last $1 million on Friday morning, I said. Then we have to stop them. Renee said. We are not just going to stop them, I said, watching the traffic weave through the financial district. We are going to trap them. I have the proof. Renee, I have the protector. I have the fraud. Prepare the emergency petition. I said, but do not file it yet. Why? Renee asked. Because my father thinks he has until Friday. I said, I want him to think he's won. I want him to feel safe. And then, I said, hailing a cab. On Thursday afternoon, we dropped the guillotine. The courtroom in the Middlesex County Probate and Family Court smelled of floor wax and old misery. It was a place where families came to be dissected, and as I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Renee Sloan, I felt the sharp, cold blade of the law hovering over my neck. We had filed an ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order to freeze the assets of the Catherine Turner Trust. It was a desperate move, a legal handbrake pulled at 90 miles an hour. My father and stepmother sat on the other side of the aisle. Graham looked stoic, wearing a suit that whispered of old money and quiet dignity. Elaine, however, was the star of the show. She wore a black dress that was simple to the point of austerity, no jewelry, her face scrubbed clean of makeup to reveal a vulnerability I had never seen in her before. She dabbed at her eyes with a linen handkerchief before the judge even entered the room. All rise, the bailiff droned. Judge Eleanor Byron swept in. She was a woman in her 60s with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen every variation of human greed. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked over the rim at us. We are here on an emergency motion regarding the Turner Trust. Judge Byrne said, Ms. Sloan, you have the floor. Why should this court interfere with the administration of a private trust on such short notice? Renee stood up. She was not charming. She was surgical. Your Honor, we have evidence that the trustees have engaged in a systematic depletion of the trust corpus, reducing it from $10 million to less than $1 million in a matter of years. We have evidence of self-dealing, specifically transfers to a shell company known as Graybridge Strategies, which operates out of the trustees' wealth management firm, and we have reason to believe the final remaining assets are scheduled to be liquidated within 48 hours. Judge Byrne looked at the defense table. Mr. Finch? Mr. Finch stood up, radiating outraged ponderousness. Your Honor, this is a tragedy. Not a legal tragedy, but a family one. Nora Turner has been estranged from her family for years. She returned to town only after her mother's death, and her first act was to demand money that her parents, her loving parents, had already invested according to the broad discretionary powers granted to them. He gestured to Elaine, Mrs. Turner has been trying to manage a complex estate while grieving the loss of the co-trustee, Catherine Turner. The funds Ms. Sloan mentions were not stolen. They were invested in community development projects. The fact that the beneficiary does not understand high-level finance does not constitute fraud. It constitutes confusion. Judge Byrne looked at Elaine. Mrs. Turner, you are the current sole trustee? Elaine stood up slowly. Her voice shook just enough to be heartbreaking without being theatrical. Yes, Your Honor, Catherine, my husband's late wife. She and I were close. We made these decisions together. We wanted to grow the family's impact. Nora, she has always been difficult about money. She thinks we are trying to hurt her, but we are just trying to build something she can be proud of. She looked at me then, her eyes swimming with tears. Nora, honey, please, don't do this. We can work this out at home. Do not drag your mother's memory through this place. I felt the eyes of the courtroom on me, the court reporter, the bailiff, the few bored lawyers waiting for the next case. They all saw the same thing, a greedy, estranged daughter attacking a grieving, elegant woman who only wanted peace. Judge Byrne drummed her fingers on the bench. The allegations of self-dealing are serious, she said, specifically the connection to this Graybridge entity. However, the trustees have broad discretion. She paused. The silence stretched, thin and tight as a wire. I am granting a temporary hold on all trust distributions for 14 days. She ruled. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. However, she continued, glaring at me, if I find that this motion was frivolous, Ms. Turner, or brought to harass the trustees, I will sanction you for the full cost of the defense's legal fees. And looking at Mr. Finch's hourly rate, that will be substantial. We walked out of the courtroom into the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. Graham walked past me without stopping, but he leaned in close as he passed. You have made a mistake. Nora, he whispered, a very expensive mistake. The legal victory was a band-aid over a bullet hole, but the social retaliation was immediate and total. Briar Glen was not just a town, it was a nervous system, and my father controlled the brain. 2 days after the hearing, I walked into the local coffee shop, the Daily Grind. I had been going there since high school. The owner, a man named Pete, who used to give me free biscotti, looked up as I entered. He did not smile. He turned his back and started wiping down the espresso machine. I ordered a black coffee. He slid it across the counter without a word. When I tried to pay, he waved his hand. Just take it, he said. We don't want any trouble here. Trouble? I asked. It is just coffee. Pete, I heard about the funeral, he said, not looking at me. I heard you threaten to sue the hospital board if they did not pay you off. That is low. Nora, your mother loved that hospital. I stared at him, the cup burning my hand. That is not true. Whatever, he said. Just go. I walked out, my face burning. My phone, which had been silent, started buzzing with notifications, but they were not texts. They were removals. I was removed from the Briar Glen alumni group chat. I was unfriended by 3 of my mother's garden club friends. Then I saw the post on the town's community Facebook page. It was a blind item rumor, clearly planted. So sad to see a prominent local family under attack by an ungrateful child. Imagine demanding cash before your mother's grave is even settled. Some people have no shame. Below it were dozens of comments. Disgusting. Entitled generation. I stand with Graham and Elaine. I realized then that truth did not matter in Briar Glen. Narrative mattered, and Graham was telling a story where he was the benevolent patriarch under siege by a mentally unstable, greedy daughter. He was isolating me. He was cutting off my oxygen. I sat in my rental car and cried for 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face and drove to Renee's office. Renee was in a foul mood. Her office was buried in paper. We got the response to the subpoenas, she said, gesturing to a stack of boxes. Marrowgate and Graybridge. And? I asked. And it is garbage, Harper said from the corner. He was holding a document that was 90% black marker. They redacted everything. Harper said, client privilege, proprietary trading strategies, third-party confidentiality. They gave us 5,000 pages of nothing. I picked up a page. It was a solid block of black ink. This is stalling. I said, of course it is, Renee said. They are waiting out the 14 days. Once the judge lifts the hold, the money vanishes, and they win. We need a leak. Harper said, we need someone inside. As if on cue. The receptionist knocked on the door. Package for you. Renee. No return address. Courier just dropped it. Renee took the large manila envelope. She felt the weight of it. She grabbed a letter opener and slit the top. She pulled out a small stack of printed emails. No redactions. She scanned the first one. Her eyes went wide. Well, she said softly. Hello? Sarah Jenkins. Who? I asked. The compliance officer you terrified. Renee said, look at this. She handed me the email. It was dated 6 months ago. From Elaine Turner, David Joyner, Marrowgate. Subject, beneficiary interference. David, Nora is asking questions again. She is asking for statements. We need to neutralize this. If she sees the Graybridge transfers, she will understand the leverage on the construction loans. How do we contain the asset without triggering a disclosure event? I felt a chill go through me. Neutralize. Contain the asset. She wasn't talking about a portfolio. She was talking about me. Read the reply. Harper said. I looked at the next sheet. From David Joyner. Elaine Turner. Elaine, do not provide the statements. We will classify the trust as distressed illiquid, which allows us to pause reporting under Section 12 of your service agreement. If she presses, we can draft a reorganization plan that delays access for another fiscal year. In the meantime, I recommend moving the remaining liquidity to the charitable holding account. It masks the trail. This is not just family drama, Renee said, her voice hard. This is professional misconduct. This is a licensed wealth manager advising a trustee on how to defraud a beneficiary. We can use this. I said, we can use this to hang them. Renee said, but there is more. She pulled out a final document from the envelope. It was a memo from the Turner Harbor Foundation files. Termination of employment. Lydia Crane. Reason: breach of confidentiality. Notes: employee attempted to access restricted donor files regarding Graybridge strategies. Employee was offered severance in exchange for full NDA and non-disparagement. I stared at the paper. Lydia hadn't just been fired. She had been hunted. I needed to see Lydia. I drove to her small apartment on the outskirts of town, a place where the lawns were patchy and the fences leaned. She opened the door, wearing a bathrobe, looking surprised. Nora? I know. Lydia. I said, I know why they fired you. She let me in. The apartment was cluttered but clean. She sat on the sofa, pulling the robe tighter around herself. I tried to warn your mother, Lydia said, her voice trembling. I saw the checks. They were writing checks to Graybridge for strategic consulting, but the amounts were exactly the same as the interest payments on the construction loans for the condos. It was a pass-through. And you told the board? I asked. I tried. Graham shut me down. He told everyone I was drunk at work. He told everyone I was stealing from the petty cash. He destroyed me. Nora. I couldn't get a job in this town for 3 years. Why didn't you sue? With what money? Lydia asked bitterly. And against who? Graham Turner? He owns the judges. He owns the press. I took the severance and I signed the paper because I had to eat. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a fearful hope. Are you going to stop him? I am. I said, I have the emails. I have the proof. Lydia reached out and squeezed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Be careful. Nora, a man who will destroy his wife's best friend to save his reputation. There is no limit to what he will do to a daughter who threatens his wallet. That evening, I was walking back to my hotel when a car pulled up alongside me. It was the silver convertible, Camden. He looked terrible. He was unshaven, his eyes bloodshot, wearing a hoodie instead of his usual cashmere sweater. Get in, he said. I kept walking. I have nothing to say to you. Cam, please, Nora, just for 5 minutes. I am begging you. There was something in his voice, a jagged, desperate edge, that made me stop. I got in the car. He drove us to the marina, parking in the shadows of the dry dock. He killed the engine and gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. You have to drop the freeze, he said. He did not look at me. Excuse me? The freeze on the trust. You have to drop it. Tomorrow. Why would I do that? I asked. So you can finish stealing the last $1 million? I did not know, he shouted, turning to face me. He looked frantic. I swear to God. Nora, I did not know it was your money. Dad told me he secured a private investor. He said it was a silent partner. I thought it was some venture capital fund. I did not know it was the trust until the bank started calling the loans. You expect me to believe that? I asked coldly. You joked about my college fund paying for the bricks. That was a joke, he cried. A stupid, drunk joke. I did not know it was literal. He took a breath, trying to steady himself. Look, Nora, I can fix this. If you drop the freeze, the bank releases the next tranche of funding. I can finish the building. Once the units sell, I will pay you back. I will give you $2 million, double what is left. I will write you a promissory note right now. I looked at him. He was 26 years old, a boy playing at being a tycoon, and he was terrified. And if I don't? I asked. He put his head on the steering wheel. If you don't, the bank forecloses on Monday. They take the land. They take the unfinished building. My company goes bankrupt. Dad leveraged the house to guarantee the construction loan. I stared at him. The house? Everything. Camden whispered. He bet everything on this. If the project fails, we lose the house. We lose the cars. We lose the foundation. We are destitute. Nora. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. Please. I know they treated you like shit. I know I was an asshole. But don't burn the whole family down. Just let me finish the building. I will make you whole. I promise. For a second, I wavered. I saw my little brother, the kid I used to push on the swings. I saw the ruin that was coming, the total annihilation of the life they knew. It felt cruel. It felt excessive. But then I remembered the timeline. You need the freeze drop tomorrow. I said, yes, because the loan matures on Monday. Yes. So you are not here because you are sorry. Camden, you are here because you are out of time. Nora, please. And you didn't know? I asked quietly. You are the developer. You signed the checks to Graybridge. You saw the source of funds. Do not lie to me. You knew. You just didn't care until the music stopped. He flinched. The mask of the scared boy slipped, revealing the selfish man beneath. You bitch. He spat. You are going to ruin us all out of spite. I opened the car door. Not spite. Cam. Accounting. I slammed the door and walked away, leaving him screaming in his silver car in the dark. I went straight to Renee's office. I told her about Camden, about the house being leveraged, about the foreclosure deadline on Monday. We have them. Renee said, they are not just on the ropes. They are hanging over the cliff by their fingernails. But we need to cut the fingers. Harper said. He was reading the bylaws of the Turner Harbor Foundation. I found something. Harper said, it is in the governance section, buried in the appendices. He spun the laptop around. Section 14.3, Automatic Board Reconstitution. In the event that a trustee of the funding source, the Catherine Turner Trust, is removed for cause by a protector, such removal shall constitute a vote of no confidence in the Foundation's Board of Directors. The board shall be immediately dissolved and reconstituted under the supervision of an external auditor. I read it twice. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Renee said, a slow smile spreading across her face, that if Dr. Reed fires your father from the trust, he also automatically fires him from the foundation, and Elaine, and everyone else on that board who looked the other way. It strips them of everything. I said, the trust, the charity, the titles, it is the kill switch. Harper said, but we need Reed to pull it. Renee said, and we need him to do it before Monday. I drove to New Hampshire in the middle of the night. I could not wait. I reached Dr. Reed's cabin as the sun was coming up, painting the frost on the trees in shades of violent pink. He was awake, chopping wood on the side of the house. He saw me and rested the axe against a stump. You have the look of a woman who has seen the devil, he said. I showed him the emails. I showed him the neutralize memo. I told him about Lydia Crane. I told him about the foreclosure deadline. He read the documents sitting on his porch, his breath misting in the cold air. When he finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed his face. This is not mismanagement, he said softly. This is malice. He looked at the woods. I knew your father was ambitious. I did not know he was cruel. He looked at me. If I sign the removal instrument, Nora, I have to file it with the court immediately. It becomes a public record. The allegations, the fraud, the self-dealing, the neutralize order, it all becomes public, I know. I said, there will be no going back. He said, you cannot save them after this. Once I strike this match, the fire burns until there is nothing left but ash. I thought about the house where I grew up. I thought about the dinner parties. I thought about the way Graham looked at me when he said, you weren't using it. I thought about my mother, photographing documents in the dark, terrified of being erased. Sign it. I said, Doctor. Reed nodded. He went inside and came back with a fountain pen. He laid the document on the railing of the porch. He signed his name, Malcolm Reed, Protector. He handed it to me. Go, he said. Finish it. I drove back to Briar Glen with the signed paper on the passenger seat. My phone rang. It was Graham. "Nora," he said. His voice was ragged. He sounded like he had aged 20 years in 2 days. "I am at the office," he said. "We need to meet. I have a proposal. I am not interested in proposals." "Dad, please," he said. "Just listen. We can restructure the debt. We can give you a lien on the house. Just don't file anything else. Give us a week." He was begging. The great Graham Turner was begging. "I am sorry." "Dad," I said. "Nora, wait." I hung up. I pulled up to the courthouse. Renee was waiting on the steps. She looked at the document in my hand. "Is that it?" she asked. I nodded. "Are you ready?" she asked. I looked at the building. I looked at the town beyond it. The perfect white steeples and the manicured lawns. I knew that by sunset, the illusion would be shattered. I knew that I would be the villain in their story forever, but I also knew that for the first time in my life, I was writing the ending. "I am ready," I said. We walked up the steps together. The filing of the removal instrument was anticlimactic. In movies, legal victories are accompanied by a gavel bang or a gasp from the gallery. In reality, it was the dull, rhythmic thump of a date stamp at the clerk's window of the probate and family court. I stood next to Renee as she slid the document under the glass partition. The clerk, a man with a mustache that looked like a wire brush, didn't even look up. He stamped the original, stamped the copy, and tossed it into a wire basket. "That is it?" I asked. "That is it," Renee said, putting the file back in her briefcase. As of 10:32 this morning, Elaine Turner is no longer the trustee of the Catherine Turner Trust. She has been stripped of all authority. She cannot sign a check, she cannot sell a stock, and she cannot enter the safe deposit box. It felt like we had just detonated a bomb that made no sound. Dr. Reed's signature on the removal notice was the detonator. The blast radius would take a few hours to expand, but the shockwave was already moving through the invisible wires of the banking system. We walked out of the courthouse into a gray, drizzling morning. My phone was silent. My father didn't know yet. Elaine didn't know yet. For the next hour, they were still living in a world where they were in control. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. By 2 o'clock, the silence broke. We were back in Renee's office when the phone rang. Renee put it on speaker. "Ms. Sloan, this is David Joyner at Marrowgate Private Partners." His voice was different. The smooth, condescending baritone was gone. In its place was the shrill, rapid-fire tone of a man trying to save his own license. "Mr. Joyner," Renee said, leaning back in her chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "We received the court order regarding the change in trusteeship," Joyner said. "We just wanted to reach out and assure you of our full cooperation. We have already frozen the accounts as per the interim fiduciary's instructions. We want to be very clear that Marrowgate has always acted on the instructions of the authorized trustee, and we are eager to assist the new administration in any way possible." I looked at Harper. He rolled his eyes and made a yapping motion with his hand. "That is quite a pivot." "David," Renee said dryly, "considering last week you told my client to get lost and threatened to call security." Joyner laughed. A nervous, hacking sound. "Water under the bridge. Ms. Sloan, misunderstandings happen. We are preparing a full transaction history for you. You will have it by end of day. We want to be transparent." Renee ended the call. "Rats," she said. "The ship is taking on water," Harper said. "And the captain is the first one they will throw overboard." The court had appointed an interim professional fiduciary named Marcus Vance. He was a forensic accountant by trade, a man with a reputation for being about as warm as a chest freezer. His job was to secure the assets, audit the books, and report back to the judge. Vance didn't care about the family drama. He didn't care about the gala or the hospital wing. He only cared about the math. And for Graham and Elaine, who had spent decades surviving on charm and social capital, Marcus Vance was a nightmare. I had to go to the house the next day. Vance had ordered an inventory of movable assets purchased with trust funds, which apparently included artwork, jewelry, and vehicles stored at the estate. As the beneficiary, I was allowed to be present. The house was quiet when I arrived. The staff was gone, likely fired or quit when the checks stopped clearing. I walked into the foyer, flanking Vance and his two assistants. The air in the house felt stale, like the oxygen had been sucked out. I heard a voice coming from the library. "We are a family that has always prioritized service. This misunderstanding, this technical glitch with the trust, it is being resolved. My daughter and I are in constant communication." I walked to the open door of the library. Graham was standing in front of the mirror above the fireplace. He was wearing a tuxedo jacket over his jeans. He was holding a tumbler of scotch. He was looking at his own reflection, practicing his face. He adjusted his expression. He softened his eyes. He tilted his head slightly to the side to look more empathetic. "Nora is a spirited young woman," he said to the mirror. "We are proud of her independence. We are working through this privately, as families do." He took a sip of scotch, then grimaced and shook his head. "No," he muttered, too defensive. "Try the wounded angle." He reset his face. He looked sad. He looked noble. "It breaks my heart that money has come between us, but I forgive her." I stood there, watching him. I had spent my whole life thinking my father was a titan, a man of unshakable conviction. I thought his coldness was strength. I thought his silence was wisdom. But standing there, watching him rehearse his lies like an actor preparing for a callback, I realized the truth. He was not a titan. He was a performance artist. His entire life was a script he had written for an audience of peers he despised. He didn't care about the money because he was greedy. He cared about the money because it bought the stage lights. I knocked on the doorframe. "Hello, Dad?" Graham spun around. The scotch sloshed over the rim of the glass. For a second, I saw the rage. It flared in his eyes like a match strike. Pure, white-hot hatred. Then, the mask slammed down. The rehearsed empathy slid into place. "Nora," he said, putting the glass down. "I didn't hear you come in." "Mr. Vance is here," I said. "He is cataloging the art." Graham nodded slowly. "Of course. The inventory." He walked over to me. He didn't try to hug me this time. He stopped 3 feet away. "You are enjoying this, aren't you?" he asked softly. "No," I said. "You are," he said. "You are watching the house burn and you are warming your hands. But you forget something. Nora, the smoke chokes everyone, even the person holding the match." He walked past me, bumping my shoulder hard enough to bruise, and headed up the stairs. Harper's report landed on my desk 3 days later. It was thick, bound in plastic, and titled "Preliminary Tracing of Assets. Catherine Turner Trust." It was worse than we thought. "They didn't just spend the money," Harper said, flipping to a flowchart that looked like a schematic for a nuclear reactor. "They used the trust as collateral for everything." He pointed to a box labeled "Home Renovation Loan." "Your father took out a $3 million line of credit to renovate the estate in 2018, Harper explained. "The bank required collateral. He pledged the trust assets." He pointed to another box, "Gala Underwriting." Every time they hosted a charity event, they didn't pay for it out of pocket. They took out short-term loans against the trust to pay the caterers and the florists, then paid the loans back with the donations they collected, skimming the administrative fees off the top. It was a Ponzi scheme. "Nora, they were robbing Peter to pay Paul. And you were Peter. And Camden?" I asked. Harper sighed. "Camden is the biggest sinkhole. His entire portfolio. Not just Lake Point, but his car, his apartment in Boston, his startup investments. It is all funded by loans guaranteed by your trust. So if the trust is frozen..." I started. "The guarantees are in default," Harper said. "The banks are calling everything, the renovation loan, the car leases, the lines of credit." He looked at me. "They are insolvent. Nora, without access to your money to service the debt, your father is bankrupt. Technically, he has been bankrupt for 5 years. He has just been using your inheritance to hide it." Renee leaned forward. "We have a choice," she said. "We can file surcharge claims. We can sue your father and Elaine personally for every dime they wasted. We can go after the house, the cars, the jewelry. We can claw it all back. But," I asked. I heard the hesitation in her voice. But litigation costs money, Renee said. And time. If we fight them for every asset, this drags on for 3 years. The legal fees will eat up whatever we recover. And your father? He will not go quietly. He will scorch the earth. He will make the next 3 years of your life a living hell of depositions and smear campaigns. What is the alternative? I asked. Settlement, Renee said. We use the leverage we have now. The fraud, the imminent bankruptcy, the social ruin, to force a quick deal. We take what is left. We force them to liquidate the house to pay you a lump sum, and we walk away. I looked at the chart. I looked at the web of lies my family had spun. No settlement. I said, not yet. I want them to say it. Say what? Renee asked. I want them to admit it. On the record, Elaine was not ready to admit anything. 2 days later, Mr. Finch requested an emergency meeting at his office. He sounded triumphant on the phone. We have found a document that changes everything, he had said. We sat in the conference room again, the same room where I had been told my trust was empty. Elaine sat next to Graham. She looked pale, but her chin was high. She pushed a piece of paper across the mahogany table. I found this in Catherine's old Bible, Elaine said softly. I must have missed it before. Renee picked up the paper. It was a handwritten letter, on my mother's stationery, to my husband and family. I have been thinking about the trust. Nora has chosen a path that is separate from us. She has distanced herself from our values. I believe it is best that the funds in the trust be used to support the family's charitable mission and the business interests that sustain us all. I give Graham full blessing to use the assets as he sees fit. Love, Catherine, July, 2020. Renee read it. She didn't blink. She didn't look worried. She looked bored. She slid the letter back to Elaine. This is a forgery, Renee said. Elaine gasped. How dare you? That is Catherine's handwriting. I found it myself. It is a very good attempt, Renee said. The handwriting is close. You probably practiced quite a bit, but you made a mistake. What mistake? Mr. Finch demanded. This is a dispositive holographic will amendment. Read the second sentence, Renee said. I believe it is best that the funds be used to support the family's charitable mission and the business interests that sustain us all. So, Elaine said. Renee pulled a file from her briefcase. In July of 2020, the Turner Harbor Foundation did not have a charitable mission statement that included business interests. That language was added to the bylaws in 2022. By you? Renee leaned in. And more importantly, your letter references the business interests, plural. In 2020, the only business interest the family had was Graham's consulting firm. Camden's development company, the other interest, was not incorporated until 2021. Renee dropped the file on the table. Your mother could not have referenced a company that did not exist. Nora, unless she was a time traveler. The room went silent. I watched Elaine. I watched the blood drain from her face. I watched her hands start to tremble. She wasn't the grieving widow anymore. She was a cornered animal who had just been caught in a trap of her own making. Mr. Finch looked at the document, then at Elaine. He closed his folder. I think we need a recess, he said, his voice tight. It was humiliating. It was clumsy. And it confirmed everything. They were not just thieves. They were bad thieves. They were so used to getting their way, so used to people believing them because of who they were, that they had forgotten how facts worked. The whispers started the next day. I met Jessa Lorne at a diner on the edge of town. She was wearing a trench coat and looking like she hadn't slept. Something is happening at Marrowgate, Jessa said, sliding into the booth. What do you mean? I have a source at the Attorney General's office, Jessa said. They served a search warrant on Marrowgate this morning. They seized servers. They are looking for evidence of money laundering and wire fraud. She looked at me, her eyes intense. This is you, isn't it? I sipped my coffee. I didn't say anything. Nora, Jessa said, lowering her voice, if this is you, if you triggered a state investigation into the biggest wealth management firm in the county, That is not just a family spat. That is a mushroom cloud. Graham is the face of their marketing campaign. If Marrowgate goes down, he goes down. I looked out the window. It was raining again. It seemed like it had been raining since I arrived. I cannot talk about it. Jessa. That is an answer, Jessa said. She pulled out her notebook. People are asking questions. Nora. About the hospital wing. About the gala. The contractors at Lake Point walked off the job yesterday. They say the checks bounced. She leaned in. You are winning, she said. But are you sure you want to be standing there when the building collapses? I am not standing there. I said, I am the one pulling the pins. The Briar Glen Medical Pavilion Gala was the biggest night of the year. It was the night my father was supposed to be announced as the new chairman of the board. I shouldn't have gone. Renee told me not to go. But I had to see it. I had to see the end. I bought a ticket online under a different name and wore a dress I had bought in Chicago. A sharp, architectural black gown that looked like armor. I stood in the shadows of the ballroom, watching the glitter and the champagne. Graham and Elaine were there. They were working the room. But the energy was off. People were smiling. But they weren't lingering. They were shaking Graham's hand and then moving away quickly, as if he were contagious. The rumors had hit. The contractor walkout at Lake Point. The search warrant at Marrowgate. In a town like Briar Glen, bankruptcy was a social disease, and my father was patient zero. I watched a member of the hospital board, a heavy-set man named Dr. Aris, corner Graham near the buffet. Graham. Doctor, Aris said. His voice carried over the low hum of the jazz band. We need to clear up these rumors about the pledge. The finance committee is asking for proof of funds. Graham smiled. But it was tight, a rictus of panic. It is just a liquidity timing issue. Bob, the trust transfer is stuck in probate. Just a formality. It has been 2 weeks. Graham, Dr. Aris said, his voice hardening. And now I hear the feds are at Marrowgate? We cannot have that kind of exposure attached to the pavilion. Elaine stepped in, placing a hand on Dr. Aris's arm. Bob, please. This is a celebration. Let us not talk business. Dr. Aris pulled his arm away. He looked at Elaine with a cold, polite disdain. It is not business, Elaine. It is integrity. If the money isn't there by Monday, the board is going to rescind the chairmanship offer. We cannot afford the scandal. He walked away. I saw Elaine's face crumble. For a second, just a second, the mask fell completely. She looked around the room, at the flowers, the lights, the people she had spent 20 years trying to impress, and she realized it was gone. The power wasn't in the money. The power was in the belief, and the belief had evaporated. She looked across the room. Her eyes locked with mine. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just raised my glass of sparkling water in a silent toast. To the truth. She turned away, grabbing Graham's arm, her knuckles white. I left the gala before the speeches. I couldn't stomach the lies. As I was walking to my car in the valet line, a figure stepped out from behind a pillar. It was Camden. He was wearing a suit, but his tie was undone. He smelled of whiskey. You did it, he said. I didn't stop walking. I did what I had to do. He fell into step beside me. The bank took the project today, he said. They sent the notice of foreclosure. It is over. I am bankrupt. I am sorry. Cam, are you? He asked. He didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded hollow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. I found this, he said, in the Graybridge files. Before they locked me out of the server, he handed it to me. I thought maybe he didn't know. Camden said, I thought maybe Marrowgate tricked him too. I wanted to believe that he was just incompetent. Not this. He looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. He knew. Nora? He built the whole thing. He walked away, disappearing into the dark parking lot. I got into my car and turned on the dome light. I unfolded the paper. It was a printout of an email from Graham to the founder of Marrowgate, dated 5 years ago. Subject: Structure for Trust Utilization. John, regarding the Catherine Turner Trust. Since Catherine is incapacitated, I need a vehicle to access the principal without triggering beneficiary notification requirements. I propose a consulting arrangement with a third-party entity. We can route the distributions as expenses. Let me know if Graybridge is available as a DBA. I need to clear the debt on the house before the election cycle. Nora will never know. She is not sophisticated enough to audit the books. Graham, Nora will never know. She is not sophisticated enough. I stared at the paper. The words swam before my eyes. He hadn't just raided the trust out of desperation. He had planned it. He had engineered it while my mother was dying. He had looked at me, his daughter, the artist, the one he called fragile, and he had calculated exactly how stupid I was. He had bet his fortune on my ignorance. I drove back to the hotel. I walked into my room and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the piece of paper that proved, finally and irrefutably, that my father was a monster. I thought I would feel vindicated. I thought I would feel a surge of triumph. I got him. I won. Instead, a sob ripped out of my chest, a raw, ugly sound that doubled me over. I cried for the money, yes. But mostly, I cried for the loss of the illusion. Even in the middle of the war, even when I was suing him, there was a tiny, stupid part of me that hoped he would fix it, that he would come to me and say, "I messed up. I am sorry. Let me make it right." But he was never going to say that, because he didn't care. He had never cared. I was not a daughter to him. I was a resource. And when the resource fought back, he tried to destroy it. I cried until my throat burned. I cried for the family I wanted, and the family I had. Then, I wiped my face. I looked at the email one last time. Nora will never know. I walked to the desk, opened my laptop, and scanned the document. I attached it to an email addressed to Marcus Vance, the interim fiduciary, and CC'd the Attorney General's office. Subject: Evidence of intentional fraud. I hit send. The witness stand was not a place of drama. It was a small wooden box that smelled of lemon polish and nervous sweat. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, looking out at the courtroom that had become the arena of my life for the past 2 weeks. "State your name for the record." The clerk said, "Nora Turner." I said, my voice sounded thin in the high-ceilinged room. I looked at the defense table. Graham was staring at his legal pad, pen poised, as if he were taking notes on a board meeting. Elaine was looking at the judge, her face a mask of polite confusion. They were still playing the parts of the aggrieved parents, the pillars of the community who could not understand why their daughter was doing this. Renee stood up. She walked toward me, her heels clicking on the parquet floor. "Ms. Turner," Renee said softly, "can you tell the court when you first became aware that the Catherine Turner Trust had been depleted?" "It was 3 weeks ago," I said, "at the reading of the updated estate documents. Mr. Finch told me the trust was no longer active." "And what was your father's explanation?" "He said my mother had changed her mind." I said, "He said she wanted to reinvest the capital into the family's broader interests. Did your mother ever discuss this with you?" "No." "Did she ever indicate that she wanted to disinherit you?" "No." I said, my throat felt tight. "She left me a note. She told me to call her friend Lydia if anything felt off. She was scared." "Objection." Mr. Finch boomed, standing up. "Hearsay. Speculation on the decedent's state of mind." "Sustained," Judge Burns said. She looked at me over her glasses. "Ms. Turner, just stick to the facts. What did you find when you examined the records?" I looked at the judge. She was not unkind, but she was clinical. To her, this was a math problem. To me, it was an amputation. I found that my trust had been used as a personal bank account for my father and stepmother. I said, "I found that they set up a shell company called Graybridge Strategies to funnel money out of the trust under the guise of consulting fees. I found that they used my inheritance to pay for their house renovations, their cars, and their reputation. And how does that make you feel?" Renee asked. It was a risky question, but she needed the emotional impact. Mr. Finch opened his mouth to object. but Judge Byron raised a hand. I will allow it. I looked at Graham. He finally looked up. His eyes were cold, empty of anything resembling love. It makes me feel erased, I said. My voice wavered, then steadied. It is not just the money, it is the gaslighting. They looked me in the eye and told me they were protecting me. They told me I was too fragile to handle the responsibility, but the truth is, they needed me to be weak so they could pretend to be strong. They stole my future to pay for their present, and they insisted I thank them for it. The courtroom was silent. Elaine dabbed at a dry eye. Graham went back to writing on his pad. The emotion was powerful, but the math was fatal. The next day, Marcus Vance, the interim fiduciary appointed by the court, filed his forensic accounting report. It was a thick document, bound in blue plastic, and it landed on the table with a heavy thud. Mr. Vance took the stand. He was a man who spoke in spreadsheets. We have traced the flow of funds, Vance said, adjusting the microphone. The pattern is undeniable. Between 2018 and the present, approximately $9.4 million was transferred from the Catherine Turner Trust to various entities controlled by Graham and Elaine Turner. Can you be specific? Renee asked. Certainly, Vance said. $3 million went to the Turner Harbor Foundation, which then used the funds to secure loans for the Lake Point Road development. $2 million went to Graybridge Strategies for services that have no documentation. Another $1.5 million was used to service personal debt on the marital residence. And was this consistent with the fiduciary duties of a trustee? Renee asked. Vance paused. He looked at the ceiling, then back at the judge. In my professional opinion, Your Honor, this was a systematic looting of the trust corpus. The trustees treated the beneficiaries' assets as their own liquidity pool. There was no separation of church and state. It was all one pot, and they spent it all. The judge nodded, making a note. The air in the room shifted. Before, there had been a presumption of complexity. Maybe it was just bad investing. Now, it was theft. We were called into a settlement conference the following morning. It was held in a small, windowless room in the courthouse annex. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. Graham and Elaine sat on one side of a scuffed laminate table. Renee and I sat on the other. Mr. Finch looked tired. He knew the Vance report was a nail in the coffin. My clients are prepared to make a significant offer to resolve this matter. Mr. Finch said. He slid a folder across the table. Renee opened it. She raised an eyebrow. $6 million, she read, payable over 5 years, secured by a second mortgage on the estate. It was not the full $10 million, but it was enough to fix my life. It was enough to walk away. There are conditions. Mr. Finch said. Of course there are. I said, we require a full release of all claims, Finch said, and a strict non-disclosure agreement. Ms. Turner agrees to seal the record. She agrees to withdraw her complaint to the Attorney General regarding Marrowgate. She agrees never to discuss the financial details of the family or the foundation with any third party. He looked at me. We want peace. Nora. We want to close the book. I looked at the number on the paper. $6 million. It was a lot of money. It was freedom. I could go back to Chicago. I could buy a studio. I could forget Briar Glen ever existed. But then I looked at the NDA. Strict confidentiality. Liquidated damages for breach. Renee leaned in and whispered to me, the money is the bait. Nora, the silence is the hook. If you sign this, they win. They get to keep their reputation. Graham gets to be the hospital chairman. Elaine gets her state appointment. They get to pretend this was just a family reallocation. And Marrowgate? They get away with aiding and abetting fraud. I looked at Graham. He was watching me with that same look he had in the restaurant. The look of a man managing an asset. He thought he could buy me. He thought everyone had a price. If I sign this, I asked, looking at him, what happens to the investigation? It goes away, Graham said smoothly. We tell the authorities it was a misunderstanding. We corrected the accounting errors. No harm, no foul. And the foundation? I asked. Remains as it is, he said. We continue our work. I looked at the paper. I picked up a pen. Graham's shoulders relaxed. He thought he had me. I signed the document, but not the settlement agreement. I pulled a different document from my bag. It was the one Dr. Reed and Renee had prepared days ago, an irrevocable instruction to the interim fiduciary. I slid it across the table to Vance, who was sitting at the head of the table. "What is this?" Mr. Finch asked, frowning. "I am authorizing Mr. Vance to pursue full clawback procedures," I said, my voice steady. "I am instructing him to liquidate the assets required to make the trust whole, and I am formally triggering the governance reset clause of the Turner Harbor Foundation." Graham stood up. "You cannot do that." "I just did." I said, "I looked at the settlement offer. I do not want your hush money. Dad, I want the truth." I stood up. "The deal is off." The consequences were not explosive. They were like a landslide, slow at first, then unstoppable. By triggering the governance reset, I forced an automatic audit of the foundation. The results of that audit were shared with the hospital board and the state appointment committee. 3 days later, the Briar Glen Medical Pavilion issued a short press release. Graham Turner has withdrawn his name from consideration for the chairmanship due to personal family matters. The next day, the governor's office announced a new appointee for the Arts Council. It was not Elaine. Camden's project, Lake Point Row, was formally foreclosed upon by the bank on Monday. The local paper ran a front-page story. "Luxury development collapses amidst funding questions." It was a quiet dismantling. There were no handcuffs, no perp walks, just the steady erosion of everything they cared about. The phone stopped ringing. The invitations stopped coming. The perfect family was revealed to be a hollow shell, held together by debt and deception. I stayed in my hotel room, watching the rain. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt heavy. I had burned down the house, and now I was standing in the ashes, realizing that the smoke choked me too. Just like Graham had said. There was a knock on my door on Thursday night. I looked through the peephole. It was Elaine. I opened the door. She was wearing a raincoat over a tracksuit. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore no makeup. She looked 10 years older than she had at the gala. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was small. I stepped back. She walked in and stood in the center of the room. She didn't sit. She looked around at the generic hotel art, the unmade bed. "We are selling the house," she said. I figured. I said, "The bank is giving us 30 days. She said, "Graham is trying to find a rental, a condo in the city. It is small." She looked at me. Her eyes were red. "Why couldn't you just take the money?" "Nora?" she asked. There was no anger in her voice, just a profound, exhausting sadness. "We could have fixed it. We could have paid you back eventually. Why did you have to humiliate us?" "I didn't humiliate you." "Elaine," I said, "you did that to yourselves when you stole from me." "I was trying to save the family," she cried, her voice cracking. "Do you think I wanted to do it? Do you think I liked lying to Catherine? Graham, he was drowning. He made bad deals. He was going to lose everything. The name, the legacy, the standing. I thought if we just used the trust as a bridge, we could get to the other side. I thought I was being a good wife." She was crying now, ugly, gasping sobs. "And you?" she said, looking at me with a flash of resentment. "You were gone. You were in Chicago. You didn't care about the name. You didn't care about the town. You were free. Why couldn't you just let us use the money to keep the lights on?" "Because it wasn't yours," I said softly. I looked at her. I saw the fear that had driven her, the terror of being ordinary, the terror of losing her place in the high society pecking order. She hadn't stolen out of malice. She had stolen out of panic. "I see you, Elaine," I said. "I see that you are hurting, but you have to understand. You sacrifice me to save your status. You cannot ask me to carry your shame just so you can keep your country club membership." She stared at me for a long time. Then, she wiped her face with her sleeve. "You are just like him," she whispered. "You are just as stubborn as your father." She turned and walked out the door. She didn't say goodbye. The final hearing was on Friday. Judge Byrne did not mince words. Based on the forensic report and the testimony provided, she said, her voice echoing in the courtroom. I am finding that the former trustees, Graham and Elaine Turner, committed a gross breach of fiduciary duty. I am ordering the full restitution of funds to the trust, to be satisfied by the liquidation of personal assets. She looked at Graham, who was staring at the floor. Furthermore, she continued, given the evidence of professional misconduct involving Marrowgate private partners, I am referring this matter to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office for further investigation. This court will not tolerate the use of estate instruments as vehicles for fraud. She banged the gavel. It was over. But it wasn't a neat win. There was no giant check handed to me. There would be months, maybe years, of asset sales, auctions, and legal wrangling to get the money back. The house would be sold. The cars would be repossessed. My father would spend the rest of his life fighting regulatory agencies. I walked out of the courtroom. The sun was shining. A cold, brittle autumn light. Renee walked beside me. You did good, kid, she said. You stood tall. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was a text from Graham. Meet me at the coffee shop across the street. Just us, father and daughter. Please. I stopped on the courthouse steps. What is it? Renee asked. He wants to meet, I said. Renee looked at her phone. She frowned. Nora, listen to me. I just got an alert. Your father filed a new petition this morning. He is appealing the removal. He is claiming bias by the protector. He is trying to drag this out. I looked at the text. Just us, father and daughter. He was still doing it. He was still trying to work the angle. He was going to sit me down, buy me a coffee, and try to charm me into dropping the case while simultaneously stabbing me in the back with a new lawsuit. He would never stop. He was a machine built for survival, and I was just fuel. I looked across the street. I could see him sitting in the window of the coffee shop. He was wearing his best suit. He was checking his watch. He looked impatient. I had two choices. I could walk across the street. I could sit down. I could let him apologize. I could take the quieter path, accept a settlement, let him save a scrap of dignity, and end the war. It would be easier. It would be over. Or I could keep walking. I could let the lawyers handle it. I could let the truth burn everything down to the ground. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how long it took, I could refuse to give him the one thing he wanted, my submission. I looked at Renee. I looked at the courthouse. I looked at the man in the window who had stolen my mother's legacy. I put the phone in my pocket. I gripped the strap of my bag, feeling the weight of the irrevocable instrument inside. I took a breath of the cold air. I stepped forward. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a journey into the dark side of family loyalty and the high price of truth. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Have you ever had to make a choice between peace and justice in your own life? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of betrayal, retribution, and the long road to redemption. Share your thoughts in English, and I will see you in the next story.